Sometimes this situation feels like a dream, like a bad dream. Like none of this is really happening. For more than 2 months Italy has been in this lockdown. Life has taken a break for many of us in some way. Probably most of you can understand what I mean by that. Many countries are affected by this disease as much as we are. Today I would like to tell you about how things are currently looking in Italy, how the situation has developed in the last few weeks, and what plans have been made for the near future. The goal, of course, is to slowly but surely return to a normal life. And if it surprises you that here it doesn't really look like the way you imagined Italy, my name is Werner and I live in the Italian Alps in the very north of Italy. Here we speak partly German, and that's probably the reason why some have already compared my accent with that of Arnold Schwarzenegger. It is now mid-May and I can fortunately say that the number of people who are suffering from the disease in Italy is decreasing. From about mid to late April, the number of actively ill people is slowly but steadily decreasing. The number of patients who need intensive care is also decreasing every day. And very importantly, also the number of people who die every day from this virus. This is certainly a result of the severe restrictions that have been necessary in recent months. Most economic activities have been suspended, schools have been closed, and people have only been allowed to leave home for certain reasons. Since May the 4th, these restrictions have been gradually eased. People can move more freely, and since May the 18th, bars and restaurants and shops could open again. This is called Phase 2, or the phase of living with the virus. For all of us, these easing measures were now also necessary. 2 months is a long time. I think especially for people who live alone or who live in a small apartment, it was a difficult time personally. One would like to be active again, to meet friends again, simply to participate in social life again. The damage that this situation has caused, also in psychological terms, is certainly huge. But that is only one aspect of the whole story. I think that many people have also felt this lockdown as a great burden because they have to run a business or of course have to work and earn in order to live. If you are prevented from doing so, it doesn't feel good. Employees in Italy are actually relatively well protected by law, at least when they have a fixed job. Compared to other countries, it is relatively difficult to fire someone in Italy. For the period of the lockdown, therefore, various options have been provided for leaving employees at home. Some employees had to use up some vacation time, others had to take time off in some other way. In addition, the state has partially assumed the payment of wages. However, it is clear that if the business gets into financial difficulties, jobs are not secure even in Italy. And it is likely that many companies in Italy will fail and possibly will not open again. The number of companies at risk is now said to be 50,000. The Italian state, like other states, is trying to support the economy as good as possible. Contributions for the self-employed and small businesses have been promised. The state provides guarantees for loans taken out by companies. The Italian state wants to help people to get through this period. That all sounds quite good. The problem is simply, and I said this last time already, that the state cannot really afford these measures. The Italian state is already heavily indebted, and since this year a lot of companies and also households will earn less, the state's tax revenue will also decrease. You have to imagine it like this. The state is selling bonds to raise money. With this money the state pays for the major bonds of the last years. In order for a saver to be willing to buy state bonds, the state must offer interest. The less trust investors have in a state, the higher the interest rate has to be, so that the bonds are still bought. You can imagine that in recent weeks, confidence in the economic future of Italy and certainly of other states as well has declined sharply. Those who are still willing to invest their money in the future of the state at this point in time will only do so in exchange for very high interest rates. Without help from outside, it would therefore hardly be possible for the state to borrow new money in the coming months to pay off debts that have fallen due. For this reason, there have been many debates with the other states of the European Union in recent weeks about what help could look like for Italy and of course for other severely affected states. Apart from this, resistance to the restrictions has become increasingly apparent in recent weeks. In addition, Italy tends to regulate everything down to the last detail by law. Where do I have to wear a mask? In which cases may I leave the house? What distance must I keep where? And when must I disinfect my hands? I had to issue a self-declaration which explained why I was not at home. The draft of this self-declaration was then changed again and again, so it was not always easy for the normal citizen to keep up to date. I do not want to criticize any of this because these are special circumstances which probably require special measures. But these are all big cuts in personal freedom, and I think that the resistance that arises against the restrictions on personal freedom also depends on how strongly the value of freedom is anchored in a society. I do think that this feeling of freedom is strongly anchored in the consciousness of Italians as well. Nevertheless, I would say that most of them have stuck to the rules and have sacrificed a lot so that the situation can improve again. Some regions have opposed the state regulations and have decided to go their own way. This is also the case in the region where I live. This region here is called South Tyrol, or in Italian Alto Adige. Internationally, this region is perhaps better known for the Dolomites. Tourism is here similar to many other parts of Italy, certainly the most important economic sector. The mountains and the landscape, and of course the good food and the mild, almost Mediterranean climate attract millions of tourists every year. You can imagine what the lockdown means for many businesses here. This is probably one of the reasons why it was decided not to follow the state rules and to open shops, bars and restaurants earlier than planned by the state. I should also add that there have been very few new infections here in recent weeks, and that this region, similar to the states in the United States for example, has its own autonomy and can therefore set its own rules in many areas. So last week, for the first time in 2 months, I was in a bar for a coffee, and actually it almost felt like normal life again. Most people correctly wore a face mask and tried to keep the distance rules. I was surprised to see that the bars were quite well attended. At the entrance, one has to disinfect one's hands, and in the pub a distance of 2 meters to other guests has to be kept. People from the same household are allowed to sit at the same table. Despite all the unusual rules, it was again a piece of normality to stand at the bar and drink a coffee, which felt good. Soon hotels will be able to open again, although it will probably be a difficult season for tourism this year. The borders to other countries are still closed. Italy plans to open its borders on the 3rd of June, but this does not mean that citizens of other countries will be allowed to leave their country. However, I think that tourism can recover in a few months, always hoping that a second wave will not reach us soon. As I said, the country has a lot to offer, not only culturally and in terms of landscape, but also in terms of lifestyle. We will see how things go on. I am sure that we will succeed in adapting to this situation as well. Normality will return, even if it will perhaps be a slightly different, changed normality for a longer period of time. But that does not change the fact that this is a unique country, which will still be beautiful and attractive in a few months. I hope you are well and stay healthy, and see you next time.